I know I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but let's take a look at our summary of our inverse circular functions. This is including why I brought this up first is because we're also going to be looking at cotangent, arc secant, arc cosecant. Notice the intervals that we are going to be going over. Alrighty, so we're going to be in quadrants 1 and 2. We're going to be in quadrants 1 and 2. Please don't be half pi because we are undefined. We're going to be in quadrants 1 and 4. Don't be 0 or 2. Don't be 0 or what we consider 2 pi because again we're undefined. What do I mean by that? Well, when we are looking at our cosecant functions, this is the cosecant. We are going to go from negative pi over 2. So when we, let me get my pen here. So we are going to use this as my interval from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2 without being the asymptote. So we're looking at this portion of the graph. Let me hit my highlighters here. Boom. So this is the cosecant graph, not the inverse of it. So we're going to be looking, and then remember this keeps going forever, approaching the asymptote but never touching it. And the same with up here. We're going to approach the asymptote but never touch it. Don't be 0 because we are undefined. So that's what we're saying. On our secants, we're going to go from 0 to pi over 2. Actually, we're going from 0 to pi. We're going from 0 to pi, so we're looking at this much. Don't be pi over 2 because that's where the asymptote is. That's where we cease to exist. So we're looking at this portion that we're going to find the inverse of and this portion that we're going to find the inverse of. And then we have our cotangent. Cotangent just goes from 0 to pi. Don't be the 0, don't be the pi because that's where our asymptotes are. So we're only looking at this iteration of the graph. Don't be the asymptotes. So we are looking at that portion, that graph right there. So please pay attention to which quadrants, according to the charts, that my reciprocal functions live in or exist in. I always say live instead of it, they exist in. So if we want to use our calculators and we're going to find our degrees and radians, that means we need to set up our calculators for degrees, and then we're going to set up our calculators for radians. So secant is associated with inverse cosine. So we're going to find the inverse in our calculator. We're going to hit inverse cosine of 1/4. We're going to do the inverse cosine of 1/4. And in degrees, we are going to get 75.5225 degrees. And radians will give us 1.3181 radians. Now, arc cotangent can be a little tricky because when we do this, that we are going to type into our calculator the inverse tangent of negative 0.3541. We're going to put that in. But the problem with this, when we are looking at tangent, if you notice when we're doing a negative tangent puts us in quadrant 4. Well, cotangent, which is what we're finding the arc of, doesn't exist in quadrant 4. It exists in quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. So we want it up here instead of down here. So what we're going to have to do to this is for our degrees, we're going to have to add 180 because I want to bring it around to the negative quadrant for arc cotangent. And so when we look at this, when we type this into our calculator, making sure we use our degree mode, we are going to get 109.4991 degrees. And then when I type this in for radians, we're going to do change our calculator to radians, and we're going to start off the same way. Arc tangent of -3541, but since we're in radians, we're not going to add 180. We are going to add pi. And that gives us 1.9111 radians. Okay, so be careful. Arc cotangent exists in different quadrants than tangent does. What if we find the inverse reciprocal of this function? So what we are asking for is we want to find y, and that is going to equal secant is the inverse cosine, and because it's we're going to do the reciprocal of that. So if you remember, cosine exists in from 0 to pi, and we are 1/2 way up here. We're at 1/2 radical 3 over 2, and I'm only interested in this value, and that happens, oh my gosh, secant. Cosine goes to secant, and that is going to happen at pi over 3. And then we're going to do arc cosecant. Arc cosecant goes with sine, and then we're going to find the reciprocal of that. Well, if you're looking at our unit circle, this doesn't exist on our unit circle because we need to rationalize that denominator. So we are going to find the arc sine. It's going to stay negative. Bring the radical to the top. Leave the radicand behind. So sine is in quadrant 1 and 4. And we're going to come down to negative radical 2 over 2. And that's going to be negative pi over 4. Boom. So negative pi over 4. Boom. Easy peasy. Let's do arc cotangent when we get together so we can talk about this one again. We'll do example 7C in class. If you've got any questions or anything was unclear, let me know. Please be careful when you're doing your secants and your cosecants that you're using the correct reciprocal function, because I'll be honest, on my notes when I did this beforehand, I said secant was sine, and that's what took me a minute to pause that. So please be careful when you're going with your reciprocal functions. And note that your cotangent restrictions are different than your tangent restrictions. Tangent goes from quadrant 4 to quadrant 1. Cotangent goes from quadrant 1 to quadrant 2, just like sine. Alrighty, everybody, I'll see you in class. Please come with good questions and ready to work, and we'll get everything done.